39 minutes after takeoff, this Boeing 777 vanished from every radar on Earth. 239 people were on board. It has never been found. The last thing anyone on the ground ever heard was utterly routine. A final handoff to Vietnam and one calm reply from the cockpit.
Good night. Malaysian 370.
2 minutes later, the transponder switched off. No mayday. No wreckage on the water. No bodies. A wide-body airliner and everyone on it simply gone. What followed became the largest and most expensive search in the history of aviation. More than 200,000 square kilometers of deep ocean floor mapped and scanned. And to this day, it has found almost nothing. This is the true story of MH370, not the conspiracy theories. Everything the evidence actually proves, every serious theory that tries to fill the gaps, and the exact line where what we know runs out. MH370, the plane that vanished from Earth. Chapter 1, the last flight out of Kuala Lumpur. Just after midnight on the 8th of March, 2014, passengers filed onto Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. An ordinary overnight flight to Beijing, due to land at 6:30 that morning. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-200, registration 9MMRO. 12 years old, with a clean maintenance record and more than 53,000 hours in the air. It was one of the safest airliners ever built, operated by an airline with a solid safety history. In the left seat was the captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old. A veteran with over 18,000 flying hours, a Malaysia Airlines instructor, and a man so passionate about aviation that he had built a flight simulator at home. Remember that detail. We will come back to it. Beside him, First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, 27. A young pilot with around 2,700 hours, still completing his conversion training onto the 777. This was one of his final training flights before qualifying. Behind them, 227 passengers from 14 nations. The largest group by far was Chinese. There were engineers, a delegation of calligraphers, parents flying home to their children, and a flight attendant said to be weeks from her wedding. In the cargo hold sat something that would later fuel 100 theories. More than 4 tons of mangosteens, a tropical fruit, and around 200 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries. Both perfectly legal. Both later examined closely. At 41 minutes past midnight, Flight 370 lifted off and turned northeast, climbing to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet over the South China Sea. A calm, clear night. Nothing about it was unusual. For 38 minutes, everything was normal. The crew made routine radio calls. Then the aircraft approached a waypoint called Igarai, the invisible line where Malaysian airspace ends and Vietnam's begins. A standard handover point. At 19 minutes past 1 in the morning, Kuala Lumpur radar passed the flight along.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Good night. Malaysian 370.
It was a perfectly normal sign-off. But Flight 370 never called Ho Chi Minh. It never checked in with Vietnam. It never called anyone, anywhere again. At 1:21, the transponder, the box that broadcasts the aircraft's identity, altitude, and position to the whole aviation world, went dark. On every civilian screen from Malaysia to Vietnam, Flight 370 simply disappeared. For 4 hours, air traffic controllers in 2 countries would argue about whose airspace it was in, each assuming the other had it. By the time anyone raised the alarm, the aircraft had been missing and unwatched for most of the night. Chapter 2, The Turn. For hours, everyone believed MH370 had crashed into the South China Sea, somewhere on its planned route north. Ships and aircraft rushed to that stretch of water. They were searching the wrong ocean, on the wrong side of the country. Because the Malaysian military had been watching something the civilian world could not see. Military primary radar does not need a transponder. It bounces a signal off raw metal in the sky. And that night, it had recorded something that made no sense. Seconds after it vanished from civilian screens, Flight 370 turned. Not a slow drift. A hard, deliberate turn to the left, almost doubling back on itself, heading straight back across the Malay Peninsula it had just left. It flew back over the country. The radar tracked it, passing close to the island of Penang. Then it turned again, up the Strait of Malacca, out towards the open Indian Ocean, away from every airport it could have reached. The military radar even suggested wild changes in altitude, climbs and descents of thousands of feet. Investigators later treated those altitude readings with caution because primary radar is unreliable for height. But the path itself was clear and chilling. Because this was not a plane drifting helplessly. The turns lined up with real navigation waypoints, the kind a pilot enters into a flight computer. Someone in that cockpit was flying a deliberate route, away from land, away from help. A Malaysian military radar operator watched the unidentified blip cross the country in the middle of the night. No fighters were scrambled. In the confusion, an airliner flew across an entire nation's airspace, and no one stopped it. At 2:22 in the morning, a military radar station caught the aircraft one final time, roughly 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang, out over the Andaman Sea. Then it flew beyond the reach of any radar on Earth. And there, for the world, the trail went cold. A Boeing 777 had turned itself around, crossed a country, and slipped off the last screen that could see it, flying into the dark towards nothing. Chapter 3. The only witness left. With the transponder off and the radar behind it, Flight 370 should have been truly invisible, untrackable, lost the instant it left the coast. In almost any other year, that would have been the end of the story. But something nobody had planned for was still switched on. High above the Indian Ocean, a single British communications satellite, operated by a company called Inmarsat, was quietly connected to the aircraft. The aircraft's satellite terminal was still powered. And roughly once an hour, the ground station sent out an automatic electronic ping, a handshake, asking, in effect, "Are you still logged on?" Each hour, in the dark, Flight 370 answered, "Yes." These handshakes carried no GPS, no coordinates, no position at all. Just a machine confirming it was there. To almost anyone, they were meaningless. But Inmarsat's engineers realized the raw signals held a hidden fingerprint. The time each ping took to travel to the aircraft and back gave its distance from the satellite. Plotted on a globe, each handshake became an arc. A vast curved line, thousands of kilometers long, that the aircraft had to be sitting somewhere along. There were 7 of them. And the last, the 7th arc, is where this entire story would come to rest. But there was a problem. The arc curved both to the north and to the south. The aircraft could be on either half. North led back over land, over Asia, towards places with radar and people. South led into the empty bottom of the world. To choose between them, the engineers reached for something almost never used this way. A tiny shift in the frequency of each signal caused by the satellite's own slight motion. The Doppler effect. The pattern of those frequency shifts fit only one path. Not north towards land and rescue. South. Straight into the emptiest, deepest, most remote stretch of ocean on the entire planet. It was a staggering piece of detective work. Boeing, the American and British investigators, and Inmarsat had turned a communications satellite that was never designed to track anything into the only witness to a vanished airliner. It had never been done before. But the same analysis delivered a devastating catch. An arc is not a dot. The relevant stretch of the 7th arc ran for well over 1,000 kilometers above water up to 6,000 meters deep. It told them roughly where the aircraft had run out of sky, not where it lay. And there was one more clue buried in the data that still gives investigators chills. At 2:25 in the morning, 3 minutes after it left radar, the satellite terminal did something strange. It logged back on, as if its power had been cut and then deliberately restored. Something on that aircraft turned a system off, and then, minutes later, back on. Machines do not do that on their own for no reason. It is one of the small, unexplained facts that make MH370 so hard to let go of. Chapter 4, 7 hours into nowhere. Piece the timeline together and a chilling picture forms. After that last radar contact, the aircraft made a final major turn to the south and then flew on. In a long, straight, steady line, deep into the southern Indian Ocean, for nearly 6 more hours. 6 hours of a fully functioning aircraft, tracking steadily away from any coastline, any airport, any ship, any hope of rescue. And here the great debate of MH370 begins. Who or what was flying it? One possibility, no one was flying it at all. A cabin starved of oxygen. A slow decompression or a fire that consumed the air, leaving everyone on board unconscious. The aircraft flying on autopilot like a ghost, carrying the sleeping and the dead until its fuel ran dry. The other possibility is darker. A conscious hand on the controls the entire way, holding a heading chosen for one purpose: to fly the aircraft to the one part of the ocean where it would be almost impossible to ever find. The evidence cannot yet settle which it was, but it can tell us, almost to the minute, how it ended. At 8:11 that morning, the aircraft answered its 7th and second-to-last handshake far out over the Southern Ocean. Then, silence where the 8th should have been. The engines had almost certainly flamed out, one after another, as the tanks finally emptied. The aircraft was gliding now, powerless, above the sea. 8 minutes later, at 8:19, there was one last, partial signal. The kind a system sends when its power has just been restored, most likely by a backup generator kicking in as the aircraft descended. A dying machine sending one final word. And the frequency of that very last transmission told investigators something terrible. The aircraft was descending, fast, and getting faster. A rate of descent, in the final moments, far steeper than any normal flight. Then the 7th arc went quiet forever. Somewhere below it, in the dark, MH370 met the surface of one of the most violent oceans on Earth, and the sea closed over it. Chapter 5. The ocean gives back pieces. For 16 months, the ocean gave nothing back. Not a seat cushion, not a life vest, not a single confirmed fragment. The search moved to the deep seabed beneath the Ark, and much of the world quietly began to believe MH370 would never be seen again. Then, in July 2015, more than 3,000 kilometres from the search zone, a man cleaning a beach on the French island of Réunion, off the coast of Africa, waded into the surf. Tangled in the tide was a barnacle-covered slab of an aircraft wing. It was a flaperon, a control surface from the trailing edge of a wing. A part number, stamped into the metal, traced it beyond any doubt to a Boeing 777. And only one 777 on the entire planet was unaccounted for. It was the first physical proof of what the satellite data had argued for a year. MH370 had come down in the Indian Ocean, and its wreckage had spent a year drifting on the great ocean currents all the way to Africa. The barnacles told their own story. Marine biologists studied the species growing on the flaperon and the chemistry of their shells to estimate how long it had been at sea and the temperatures of the water it had drifted through. The ocean itself had kept a record. And then more pieces came. In Mozambique, in South Africa, in Mauritius, in Tanzania, in Madagascar, a scattered trail of debris, washing up along the entire western edge of the Indian Ocean over the following 2 years. Many were found not by officials, but by one man. An American named Blaine Gibson, who became obsessed with the mystery, traveled the beaches of Africa himself and personally recovered piece after piece, handing them to investigators. An ordinary man doing what governments could not. Oceanographers ran the currents backwards, modeling years of drift in reverse. The pieces were consistent with an origin near the 7th arc in the southern Indian Ocean, exactly where the satellite had said to look. Some of the debris was worse than sad. Investigators identified pieces from the cabin interior, from inside the aircraft. For interior panels to be torn out and scattered into the sea, the aircraft had almost certainly broken apart on impact. Violently. And a study of a wing flap delivered the most unsettling technical clue of all. Investigators concluded it had not been extended for a landing. Nobody had set the aircraft up to touch down gently on the water. In plain terms, at the very end, no one was trying to save it. MH370 most likely hit the ocean fast and steep and hard, which points away from a gentle, piloted ditching and towards a high-speed dive into the sea. Chapter 6, 239. It is easy, in a mystery this vast, to lose the number at the center of it. 239 people, 12 crew, and 227 passengers from 14 countries. The largest group, by far, was Chinese, 153 of them. There were also Malaysians, Indonesians, Australians, Indians, and citizens of 9 other nations. A cross-section of the world on an ordinary night flight. Among them were artists and engineers, a couple flying home to their 2 young children, workers returning from contracts abroad, and a stewardess who colleagues said was counting down to her wedding. Whole lives and whole families boarded that aircraft. Early on, one detail set off global alarm. 2 passengers had boarded using stolen passports. 1 Austrian, 1 Italian, both reported missing in Thailand. For a few days, the world braced for terrorism. But investigators quickly identified them. 2 young Iranian men. The evidence pointed not to a plot, but to migrants using false documents to try to reach a new life in Europe. No link to the disappearance was ever found. It was a heartbreaking coincidence, nothing more. For the families, the horror took a specific, cruel shape. There was no crash site to visit, no remains to bury, no coffin to lower, just a phone that stopped being answered and an airline counter with no answers to give. In Beijing, relatives gathered in a hotel and waited for news that never came. Some grew so desperate and so angry at the lack of answers that the grief spilled into protest. They had lost their families twice, once to the ocean and again to the silence. In 2015, with no wreckage found, Malaysia formally declared the disappearance an accident and all aboard presumed lost. It was a legal necessity, so families could begin to claim compensation. To the relatives, it felt like being asked to bury people who had simply vanished. 12 years later, many of those families are still waiting. Not for a body, for a fact. For someone to finally tell them, with certainty, what happened to the people they loved. Chapter 7. The theories weighed by evidence. When the facts run out, theories rush in. MH370 has attracted more of them than almost any event in modern history. So let's do what the internet almost never does. Take the serious ones, one by one, and weigh them honestly against the evidence. Theory 1. A catastrophic accident. A fire, perhaps sparked by those lithium batteries in the hold, or a sudden loss of cabin pressure that overwhelmed and disabled the crew. The aircraft then flew on as a ghost until the fuel ran out. The case for it is simple. It needs no villain. A crippling emergency could explain the silence and the long, straight, final flight. the case against it is just as strong. It struggles to explain the careful turnback, the navigation along real waypoints, and the transponder switching off at the one perfect blind spot between two countries. A fire also tends to leave a trail. Frantic radio calls, erratic, dying flight. What the radar showed instead was controlled, purposeful flying for a long time after the aircraft went silent. That is very hard to square with a burning, crippled jet. Theory 2. Hijacking by someone other than the pilots. A takeover of the cockpit, a diversion, a plan that somehow went wrong out over the ocean. It cannot be completely ruled out. But the case against it is heavy. No group ever claimed responsibility. No demands were ever made. No ransom, no manifesto, no cause. And no trace of a struggle or of any hijacker has ever surfaced in the wreckage or the investigation. A hijacking with no hijacker and no reason is hard to sustain. Theory 3, and this is the one investigators keep circling back to, that the diversion was deliberate, carried out by someone who understood the aircraft intimately and who wanted it to disappear. The case for it is deeply uncomfortable. The turnback was flown, not drifted. The systems that made the aircraft visible went dark in a sequence that looks chosen. The satellite unit rebooted. And the plane was steered towards the most remote ocean on the planet, as if by someone who did not want it found. And then there is the simulator. Investigators examined the flight simulator the captain kept at home. On its hard drive, they recovered fragments of a saved route. A path that ran out over the southern Indian Ocean, ending in the sea. Broadly, the direction the real aircraft went. This is exactly where honesty matters most, because a real man's name is attached to it. That simulator held thousands of data points from years of use. The official investigation stated the recovered route could not be conclusively linked to the flight. It is a chilling coincidence. It is not, on its own, proof of what he did. Captain Zahari was, by the accounts of those who knew him, an experienced and respected pilot. No official investigation has ever proven that he, or the first officer, or anyone else deliberately downed this aircraft. To declare his guilt about a man who cannot defend himself would be to claim something the evidence does not support. And what about the wild theories? That it was shot down and covered up. That it was secretly landed at a military base like Diego Garcia. That it was stolen or spirited away. The problem is the evidence. The Inmarsat handshakes and the debris drifting onto African beaches both point, independently, to the same lonely patch of the southern Indian Ocean. A landing at a secret base or a cover-up has to explain away real wreckage from the real aircraft, washed up by the real sea. None of them can. So here is the honest verdict, the one the official investigation itself reached. Malaysia's final report, released in 2018, was blunt. It could not determine the cause. It could not rule out that the aircraft had been turned by a third party. And it could neither convict nor exonerate the men in that cockpit. That is the truth of MH370. Not that we have no idea what happened. The evidence leans, uncomfortably, in one direction. But the one thing no one has ever been able to do is prove it. Chapter 8. The greatest search on Earth. Finding MH370 became an obsession and an engineering campaign unlike anything ever attempted. The target, a strip of seabed the size of a country, up to 6 kilometers beneath the surface of one of the roughest oceans on the planet. First, they had to map a seafloor no human had ever seen. And what they found down there was a hidden world. A landscape of underwater mountains, sheer cliffs, and volcanoes, some taller than anything on dry land, buried in total, crushing darkness. Then they lowered their machines into it. Ships dragging sonar sleds on cables kilometers long. Autonomous submarines, flying just above the seabed for hours at a time, listening for the shape of wreckage in the black. The vessels had names that became familiar to the families. Fugro Equator, Discovery, Go Phoenix. They worked the Southern Ocean through brutal weather in a search coordinated by Australia on behalf of the world. That first great effort scanned around 120,000 square kilometers over nearly 3 years. It cost close to $200 million. And in early 2017, it was suspended. It had found shipwrecks and a stunning map of the deep. It had not found the plane. Scientists went back to the drift data. A study by Australian researchers refined the most likely resting place to a specific stretch of the arc, around 35 degrees south, an area that the first search had not fully covered. The plane, they argued, might have been just beyond the edge of where they had looked. Then a private company entered the story. Ocean Infinity, a firm with a fleet of robotic submarines, made an extraordinary offer to Malaysia. They would search at their own expense. If they failed, Malaysia would owe them nothing. No fine, no fee. In 2018, they swept tens of thousands more square kilometers, faster than anyone had ever searched the deep ocean before. Their robots found centuries-old shipwrecks on the seabed. They did not find MH370. For years after, the search went quiet. Amateur investigators kept working the data from their bedrooms, some proposing new locations using experimental radio techniques. None have been confirmed. The official hunt seemed to be over. And then, in 2025, Ocean Infinity came back. Better technology, a refined target zone, and the same deal. Malaysia agreed to pay a reward of $70 million, but only if they actually found it. They searched through the southern summer, the only window when that ocean is calm enough to work. And on the 23rd of January, 2026, they stopped again. After more than 140,000 square kilometers, the result was the same word the world had heard for 12 years. Nothing. A private company had spent its own money hunting the loneliest ocean on Earth and come home empty. And yet, they refused to quit. In 2026, Malaysia extended the agreement out to the middle of 2027 to search the ground that remains. So understand this. As you are watching, the search for MH370 is not history. It is happening. Right now, somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, robotic submarines are still flying through the dark, listening for a plane that has hidden itself for over a decade. Chapter 9. What it changed. What it left behind. It seems impossible, in a world where a phone can be tracked across the planet in seconds, that a passenger jet could still simply vanish. MH370 exposed exactly how it happened. And it forced the world to make sure it could never happen the same way again. Because of this flight, the rules of global aviation changed. Airliners are now required to report their position far more often. And new aircraft must carry systems that track themselves automatically in a crisis, so that no airliner can ever again fly for 7 silent hours, completely unseen. But rules are cold comfort to the families. For them, MH370 is not a case study or a change to a regulation. It is a father who left for Beijing and never arrived. A daughter whose seat stayed empty. A question that 12 years and hundreds of millions of dollars have still not answered. They formed groups. They pushed governments. They refused to let the world move on and forget. And because of them, the search has never been allowed to truly die. MH370 remains the rarest thing in modern aviation. A disaster with no ending. A plane that took 239 people and, so far, has kept them. The ocean still holds the answer. And every day, in the dark, machines are still out there, listening for it. One day, a robot flying over a ridge 4 kilometers down may light up a shape that has waited over a decade to be found. Until then, the story stays open. MH370 is the plane we could not find. But even the crashes we do find can hide answers just as disturbing. Air France 447 fell for 3.5 minutes into the Atlantic, with its pilots awake the entire way down. and what its recorders revealed will stay with you. That breakdown is on the channel now. And if unsolved mysteries like this won't grip you, subscribe to Black Box. We take the biggest catastrophes in history apart, piece by piece, to find the truth hiding in the details. Because the truth is always in the details.
If this one got under your skin a little, good. That's the point. And it only keeps happening because people like you keep showing up.
So do one thing for me. Hit subscribe. It is free, and it is the whole reason Black Box can keep taking these disasters apart.